Hello, yeah, thank you for having
Hi.
us. I'm Alice Turner, Chief People Officer at Bossa Games, and Nisha, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks. So I'm Nisha and I am the Senior Talent Acquisition Manager here in Bossa Games, and I am based remotely in Dublin, Ireland.
Brilliant. So, first of all, you've introduced yourself, but can you give us an overview of like how Bossa started and what the studio was like back in 2010 when it started up?
Yeah, so I've only been with Bossa for about 3.5 years, so we've been going for about 12 years now, and it was started by Enrique, Roberta, and Imre, who are three founders. Enrique's still very much in the business, he's co-CEO, and then Roberta and Imre, we still have really strong relationships and use for expertise advice on a regular basis. So Bossa's culture was very much about being in the studio. It was very wacky. If anyone ever visited, there was crazy artwork all over the walls, with some rude pictures hidden behind clocks that I didn't realise until the batteries ran out. And all the pipe work was bright orange. It was a really creative studio where being in the studio, being together was a massive part of what made Bossa what it was. As an example, every Friday we had Share the Love, where Enrique would go around ringing a bell. Everyone would know that that's the end of the day and we'd all meet in the kitchen for drinks and have a company update. So yeah, it's changed a lot. If when I joined 3.5 years ago, you'd have said that Bossa was going to become a fully remote studio, I don't think I would have quite believed it. So yeah, can't give as much insight for 10, 12 years ago, but yeah, definitely big change over the last 3.5 years.
And so, what was that process of going? Like you said, I know from when I was looking at Bossa years ago, like you said, it was that wacky kind of place. It felt like everybody had to be there. So, what was the process of becoming hybrid and then fully remote?
Yeah, so same as everyone else, where COVID forced it, and we didn't have any choice. So we kind of just had to roll with that. We were doing regular check-ins with people. We'd use Peakon as our engagement survey, so we're keeping a real close eye on that, and then running surveys and focus groups of people to make sure we're just giving all the support that we could, because we didn't have the option to bring people back into the studio. And as things started to ease, we started to allow people to come in, and actually the lease was up on our two of our studios. We had three together, and the lease was up on two. So we made the decision to not renew the lease and to completely refurbish the one that we had left and make it more like a drop-in space that people would go into 3 or 4 times a week. As we did that, we didn't have the uptake. And actually, when we looked at the people that we had hired throughout COVID, they were based all over the UK. And we're like, hold on, what do people want? What's the purpose of our studio and how do we want it to be used? Because having 3 or 4 people in, Enrique was always there every day with his dog, but only having those 3 or 4 people, like we're not getting the creativity. That's not the culture that it was. So we ran some focus sessions with the studio to understand what they wanted. And actually people loved working from home. People had moved out of London, they were getting the work-life balance, spending more time with their kids, with their family. The dynamic had just shifted, and I think people just really appreciated their comfort at home and not having that commute every day, and had recreated ways to be creative, share ideas, build relationships. As an example, I Am Fish that came out, the producer was based in Germany. The team had never met him, yet they were the most tight-knit team. They did quizzes together all the time. They loved him. They'd never met him in person. So getting input from the studio, making sure that it was truly working. We then made the decision to let the final studio go and become truly fully remote.
And Nisha, this is where you came in, wasn't it, when you was recruited? So can you give us like an overview of what that was, being recruited during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting because 3 years ago, if somebody said to me, "Do you want to work fully remote?" I would have said, "No way." I never thought I'd want to work fully remote, because I did love the hustle and bustle of the being in the studio and all of that. But when it came to Bossa, when they reached out, my first thought was, I can't relocate to London. I have a house in Dublin. I'm settled here. And when I realized then that they could hire me through what's called Oyster, it's a employer of record company. So essentially they have an entity in Ireland. So they look after payroll and benefits. So I'm hired through Oyster into Bossa. So it works out perfectly. I have the best of both worlds. I work fully remote, great work-life balance. And then also a really important part, which I think is key, is meetups. So we have quarterly company-wide meetups, and the way they're organized, they're super thoughtful. You get a mixture of the strategy, culture, and then also the social piece. So it's, we've folks from Sweden, Spain, that are based in Sweden and Spain, etc. And they all travel over as well. So everyone gets together in, let's say, London. And it's really thoughtful. And it helps people feel more integrated, because I think that would be a concern companies would have with working fully remote, because it's like, how do you integrate your new starters, all of that. So a key thing for us is, if we can work it, we'll have our new starters start around the company meetup. So their first day will fall on the company meetup, they'll travel to London, and it's just a great start.
Ukie's very similar to like that. I when I started, it was very much nearer quarterly, and we've had a few that's done it like that, and they seem to get reintegrated into the team. So it's great to know that other companies are doing something similar and it's working for them as well. What would you say is like one important element that you need to factor in for remote working? Maybe something that you might just take for granted when you're in person. What's that one thing that you have to really think about and maybe implement something to meet that need?
I think communication 100%, and that's between teams, between team members, and then between the wider studio and sharing the strategy. I think we recreate Share the Love on Google Hangouts. It's not quite the same as being in the kitchen, but we've kept that in. So Enrique does a bit of a studio update, and then we have the producers or the leads from the different disciplines give updates on the game. So even if you're not in the game team, because that's missing, right? You're not seeing people building the game next to you, you're not getting glimpses of it. So people do presentations, share their screens, opportunity to play the game, and that happens every single week on a Friday, and that sort of finishes the week. I think that's really important. But it has forced us to be more deliberate about our communication. I think that is one of our values, that we are very open and transparent. So we have to think about how we communicate things. And I think sometimes I'm like, are we being over paranoid? And I'm like, no, I don't think we are. If for example, we have a lever, we have a proper communications document planned out, even if it's the most simple lever where they're going on for a really exciting opportunity. It's like, who needs to be told, when, who's the person telling them, and what's that message going to be? Because I think remote, it's much easier to miss that, and suddenly you realise that the right people haven't been told in the right order. So I think at first that felt a bit like, are we being over the top with how we communicate? And now it's just a natural part of what we do for any message that we're going to communicate to the studio. So I'd say plan and be deliberate in communication.
And what was the main challenge as you move through from like hybrid to fully remote?
We haven't had any major challenges, but I'd definitely say we're learning along the way. We haven't got it perfect. Like Nisha mentioned, the studio meetups, they're brilliant, and we really enjoy them, and that brings everyone together. But we constantly are reflecting of, should we or could we be doing more? Do we need to do more? And thinking about, is there anything that we're missing by people not getting in a room together? And we're definitely, I'm not saying we're going to go back, we are a fully remote studio, but what I mean is, say our product leads on the game team, would there be benefit for getting them in a room together for half a day to just look back on the project, the last sprint, what's coming up, and just generate some ideas in a different way? And that could be tagged onto the company event, so people don't have to travel outside of that. So we're kind of reflecting on that at the moment. I think sometimes remote, you can be working on something and running with it, and maybe not everyone's on the same page. And it's being in a room together that kind of unsurfaces some of that. So we're reflecting that it's definitely not perfect. There's a lot that works really well, but I'm sure there's more that we could do.
Brilliant. And how's Bossa employees benefited from the changes? As everyone said, like, oh, this has made my life easier or something like that? Have you got any stories of how, obviously keep them confidential, but is there anything that, you know, people said, this has benefited my life from these changes?
Yeah, Nisha, have you got any thoughts on it from chatting to people?
Yeah, so I think work-life balance is by far the top one. So we have our core hours of 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. So essentially folks can start anytime up till that, finish anytime after, do their 7.5, 8 hours. But we've so many people that have children, you know, lives outside work. And I think that is something so key that people like sometimes forget, you know, you live your life, your job lives around your life, not vice versa. And I think we're really good in Boston. I think the leadership team are really good at like ensuring people set boundaries. That like if they're working at the weekend, that's not right. How do we fix that? So there's a big focus on work-life balance and the flexibility that comes with all of that. And in terms of recruitment, candidates love how we've done it. So any candidate I speak to about how we've closed the office and essentially focusing now on in-person meetups, we work fully remote, we're an international team, like that's huge for people coming on board. And similar to what Ella was saying earlier about onboarding, she had amazing points there and I've been taking down loads of notes, but it's so important that we set expectations from the start, that they know there won't be an office and that they know kind of how we work here, and like flexibility is key. And yeah, so that's kind of main things there. Anything else to add there, Alice?
I think we were saying earlier, weren't we, that we've almost deliberately put more effort into social stuff. So when we had the studio, you'd always get the same group that stayed on a Friday because they lived near the office, and then you had the people that had a commute that would be rushing off after Share the Love. Whilst now we've got a social crew that come together on a regular basis to plan in every single month either a remote or an in-person activity, and everybody gets £25 per person to take part if they want to. So I'd say that's a big benefit for people joining. There's not the barrier of a commute, having to rush off at the end of the day and not be able to go for those drinks, or so whether they play a game together or book gig tickets, or I don't know, lots of different ideas are coming out at the moment. But I think that's the nice benefit for people as well, that there's more effort on the social side.
And I know you said about communication previously, but what other advice would you offer studios, you know, perhaps they're looking at going down the similar path as yourselves, you know, maybe they're all in studio now and the lease is coming up, or the hybrid? What advice would you offer someone who might be in a similar situation as Bossa was or is now?
Where we were and making that decision, I think getting the team involved in that decision was key. I think if we had have done that, we thought that's what everyone wanted, because only 3 or 4 people going into the studio, but we could have been wildly wrong. So getting the team involved in that decision was definitely key at the time. And then in terms of, I think making sure that your leaders are embedded and with the teams, and with that communication piece, I think about our senior management team. Our director of analytics owns communication. So every Monday in our SMT meeting at the end, we're like, right, is there anything that we can't share with the studio? Because the assumption is always share everything. So is there anything super confidential that we can't share? And if not, it's that SMT layer that are responsible for taking it to the teams and making sure that everything that we're doing is communicated clearly. I think that helps people feel part of something. And also probably how important those studio meetups are. We do a big hour long with Enrique giving key updates, and then we pick a topic. So last time the SMT proposed that we do a value session, so revamp our values. We've got a new strategy, we're all fully remote, are our values still the same? So we ran a really cool session with the studio and split everyone into groups, and that's the opportunity to get some real good ideas and energy. So I think that they're really important if you're fully remote, having something like that to bring everyone together.
Yeah, I think just on the back of that with recruitment side of things, I think every company learned when the pandemic hit was we have to do this online now. And it was kind of like putting plans together, but not thinking of it long term. I think it's so obvious now that we just need to have a really, really good like interview process. Similar to what Alan and Ella were saying earlier, like checking those biases or conscious or unconscious biases, like having like a process there. Everyone knows what they're talking about. The candidates are informed. They have the meeting people that are not, you know, that's not an interview. It's that kind of more kind of casual get together. I think having a really strong recruitment, a remote recruitment process is so, so key, because candidates will know after the first call if you do or don't have a good process, and then they'll get insight into how good or bad your recruitment setup or your remote setup is.
So do you think like candidates are more literate on what is a good remote workplace and what is a bad remote workplace now?
For sure. Yeah. I think pretty much every single candidate I speak to, they'll ask questions, and it won't be just surface level questions. It will be like, okay, what are like the regular check-ins? Can you talk me through how the one-to-ones happen? Will I work with other people from different teams? Which is amazing. Like people are really, really thinking about it, and it's because they have more options, because it doesn't matter if they're based in a city or in a countryside in the middle of nowhere, they can still work for top games companies. So yeah, big tip to get all of that in order.
And finally, you know, this is a very hypothetical question, is, you know, we've seen how a game studio has changed in the last like 5 years. What do you think a game studio or a games business is going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think those physical walls are going to start coming down. I really think with the competition out there for great talent, I think they're really going to start moving towards more remote setups. They'll start hiring similar to the way we are now in Bossa. You know, I've been part of the Irish games industry for so long, and now I'm in the UK one technically, even though I'm still in Ireland. And it's the same with our other international colleagues. So I think location, like visas, barriers, all of those things will start to strip down. So that's, I suppose, from the recruitment standpoint. But Alice, do you have anything else there to add?
No, I think I'd agree. I think it's exciting. I think, like Alan was saying about diversity, for some people attending an interview in person, that would have been a week of nervousness and not sleeping. Doing it remote, of course, you're still nervous, but it's very different. Like from a diversity perspective, even speaking personally, I wouldn't have been able to go back to work 4 days after maternity leave had I been commuting to London every day. So I think that the games space is going to just open up to create more diversity for people. I think there's a lot going on with technology, and the games industry is always keeping ahead of it. So I think that it will become trickier, because the more companies keep up, the harder it will be to get that talent. So I think the games companies have always got to be ahead of it and thinking, you know, 3 to 5 years ahead of what's coming next, and how do we attract people, and how do we make games that are exciting to engage people into the company.